Okay, so you're trying to keep up with this huge market, right? This really important market that's always changing, and it's vital to healthcare. But who actually has time to read through all those long reports?
Right. Nobody.
Exactly. And that's why we do this show, Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Okay.
where we basically go through and we pull out all the interesting stuff, all the stuff that you really got to know from all that data so you don't have to.
Absolutely. And today we're doing a deep dive into a pretty fascinating market. The global medical device analytical testing outsourcing market.
Ooh, that sounds very specific.
It is, but it's also really important. And we've got a great report. It's a 2025 report that's going to kind of be our guide for this whole journey.
Okay, so like our roadmap.
Exactly. And we're going to hit all the major highlights, all the key trends and numbers. So you walk away with a really solid understanding of this whole industry and, without getting bogged down in all those tiny details.
Perfect. And to give you an idea of just how big this market is, in 2025, it was already worth a whopping 272.4 billion US dollars.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big number.
It is, but it gets even crazier because by 2033, it's projected to skyrocket to 3.42 trillion US dollars.
Trillion with a T.
Yeah, that's a compound annual growth rate, or CGR, of 37.2%.
It's like massive growth.
It is. And you know what's really driving this massive growth?
I think it all comes down to this growing emphasis on making sure that medical devices, everything from a simple Band-Aid to like super complex surgical robots,
Yeah.
All those things are safe and actually do what they're supposed to
Like
do.
to actually work.
Exactly. And as these devices get even more complex, more high tech,
Yeah.
the testing that's required to make sure they work and that they're safe, it just becomes super critical.
So this is obviously happening all over the world, but where's the action really happening right now? Like, where are the hot spots?
Okay, so let's take a look at the 2025 numbers. North America is like the king of the hill,
Big dog.
Yeah, got the largest share of the market, over 40%. And that translates to a market value of 100.788 billion US dollars.
That's a big chunk.
It is. And it's not slowing down either. Between 2025 and 2033, it's projected to grow at a CAGR of 35.3%.
So it's still going strong.
Definitely. Now, what's interesting is, North America has some really strong factors driving all this growth.
Like what?
Well, first, you've got the regulatory environment. It's very strict, with organizations like the FDA in the U.S., and then those ISO standards that demand really rigorous testing.
So no cutting corners.
No. Then you've got the medical devices themselves. They're getting so much more complex, and that requires really specialized testing. You can't just test a surgical robot the same way you test a thermometer.
Right, totally different.
And then there's the economic side of things. Outsourcing these tests can really save companies a lot of money.
Makes sense. Okay, so breaking it down even more within North America, the U.S. market alone was valued at 79.521 billion US dollars in 2025, and that's with a CGR of 35.1%.
Yeah, now Canada came in at 12.0946 billion US dollars with a slightly higher CGR of 36.1%.
So they're catching up a little.
Maybe a little. And then Mexico was at 9.17171 billion with a 35.8% CAGR.
Okay, so pretty close to the U.S. there.
Yeah, what's interesting is even though North America is on top right now, its CAGR is actually a little lower compared to other regions.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it kind of suggests that their market's a bit more mature.
Like they're already ahead of the game.
Right, whereas other areas have more room to grow in the future.
That makes sense. Okay, so North America's leading the pack, but what about Europe? How do they compare?
All right, so across the pond, Europe is holding strong. They have the second largest market share. It was over 30% of the global revenue in 2025.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, and the market size was 78.996 billion US dollars.
Okay, so not too far behind North America.
Right, and they're projected to grow at a solid 36% CAGR from 2025 to 2033.
Okay, so not as fast as some other regions, but still healthy growth.
Definitely. Now, within Europe, there are some real power players.
Yeah.
You know.
Give me some names.
Okay, so the UK market was 13.27133 billion US dollars in 2025 with a KGR of 36.8%.
So they're leading the pack in Europe.
Yeah. So, yeah, then you've got Germany right behind them at 15.64121 billion US dollars and a KGR of 36.2%.
Still pretty close.
Yeah, now France had a market size of 7.267663 billion US dollars, the KGR of 35.2%, and then Italy came in at 6.79366 billion US dollars with a 35.4% CAGR.
Okay, so a bit smaller, but still significant.
Definitely. Now, here's an interesting one. Russia had a pretty substantial market, 12.244438 billion US dollars with a 35% CAGR. And this is despite all the, geopolitical stuff that's going on.
Right. All the uncertainty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, Spain's market was 6.47767 billion US dollars with a 35.1% CAGR. And then we've got some smaller but still notable markets.
Yeah, okay.
Like Sweden, they were 2.4488 billion US dollars with a 36.1% CAGR. Then Denmark
Yeah.
at 1.65892 billion US dollars with a 35.6% CAGR. And even Luxembourg, they're tiny, but they had 1.94795 billion US dollars with a 36.3% CAGR.
Wow, they're punching above their weight.
They are. And then all the other European countries combined had a market size of 11.05944 billion US dollars with a 34.7% CAGR. So it's a really diverse picture in Europe.
Yeah, and it shows just how many different players are involved.
Exactly.
Now, what's driving all this demand for outsourced testing in Europe? Is it similar to North America?
It is actually. A lot of it comes down to that strong focus on regulations, making sure everyone's following the rules.
Makes sense.
Yeah, the European Medicines Agency, or EMA, they set the standards and they're pretty strict.
So everyone's got to be on their toes.
Right. And then there's the innovation factor.
Yeah.
Europe is a hub for developing all these cutting-edge medical devices, and they need those specialized testing services to keep up.
Makes sense. So we've covered North America and Europe, the two big players. But what about Asia Pacific? APAC always seems to be a region with huge growth potential.
Oh, yeah. APAC is definitely a market to watch. It's super dynamic, and it's growing really fast.
Okay, give us the numbers.
So in 2025, APAC held about 23% of the global revenue. And that's a market size of 65.376 billion US dollars.
Okay, that's already a significant chunk.
It is, but what's really amazing is their projected CAGR. It's 40.7% from 2025 to 2033.
Whoa, that's way higher than North America and Europe.
It is. It makes them the fastest growing region by a long shot.
So what's fueling this explosive growth in APAC?
Well, a few things are happening at once. You've got this booming medical device manufacturing industry, especially in countries like China and India.
Right, they're becoming major manufacturing hubs.
Exactly. And then there's this growing demand for international standards, quality and regulatory standards, because these manufacturers want to export their products globally.
So they need to prove they meet the requirements.
Right. And we can't forget about the cost factor. APAC offers some really competitive outsourcing options.
So it's like the perfect storm for growth.
It is now breaking it down a bit further.
Yeah.
You've got China with a massive market, 27.45792 billion US dollars in 2025, and a TGR of 40.2%.
So they're the dominant force in APAC.
For now, yeah, then you've got Japan at 9.02189 billion US dollars with a KGR of 39.2%. South Korea is also showing strong growth. They had 7.84512 billion US dollars and a 39.8% CAGR. And India stands out with a super high KGR of 42.6% on a 2025 market size of 6.53760 billion US dollars.
Oh, wow. So they're really taking off.
Yeah, and then you got Australia at 3.399555 billion US dollars with a 40% CAGR. Singapore at 1.30752 billion US dollars with a KGR of 41%. Taiwan at 2.54966 billion US dollars and a 40.5% CAGR. Southeast Asia as a whole was at 4.3142 billion US dollars with a 40.5% CAGR. So there's growth happening everywhere.
It's incredible. And it's not just the growth rate. It's like this whole shift that's happening.
Right.
APAC is starting to demand that sophisticated testing locally, which could really change things in the long run.
Yeah, it could shake up the dominance of those North American and European companies that have been leading the outsourcing game for so long.
It's a whole new ballgame. Okay, so APAC is definitely one to keep an eye on. What about South America?
So South America has a smaller slice of the pie right now, just over 5% of the global market in 2025, with a size of 10.3512 billion US dollars.
So still a decent amount.
Yeah, and they're growing at a good pace too, with a projected TAGR of 38.1% from 2025 to 2033.
Okay, so what's behind this growth in South America?
Similar story, as medical devices get more complex and those regulations get tougher, the need for that specialized testing just keeps going up. And outsourcing is a really practical and often cheaper solution.
It makes sense now which countries are leading the charge in South America.
Brazil's the biggest player. They had a market of 4.43031 billion US dollars with a KGR of 38.7%.
Okay, so they're the ones to watch.
Yeah. Then you've got Argentina at 1.739 billion US dollars with a KGR of 39%. Colombia at 0.92126 billion US dollars and a 37.9% CAGR. Peru at 0.8488 billion US dollars with a KGR of 38.3%. And Chile was at 0.74529 billion US dollars with a KGR of 38.4%. The rest of South America combined had a market size of 1.6666654 billion US dollars with a 37.2% CAGR.
Okay, so good growth across the board. Now, we can't forget about the Middle East and Africa. They make up a smaller percentage of the market now, but what's the growth looking like there?
Okay, so the Middle East had about 2% of the global market in 2025, with a size of 10.896 billion US dollars, and they're projected to grow at a solid 38.8% CAGR.
Okay, so still pretty healthy.
Yeah, the key players there are Saudi Arabia. They had a market of 3.83539 billion US dollars with a 39.1% CAGR. Then the UAE at 2.24458 billion US dollars with a 39.3% CAGR. Turkey had a market of 0.87168 billion US dollars with a 39.7168 billion US dollars, but with a slightly lower CAGR of 38.3%. And Egypt had 0.65376 billion US dollars with a 38.6% CAGR. The rest of the Middle East combined had a market of 2.41891 billion US dollars and a 38% CAGR.
Okay, so pretty consistent growth across the Middle East.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that a lot of this growth is being driven by investments in, upgrading medical facilities, and then also stricter local regulations like those from the Saudi Food and Drug Authority, or SFDA, and the UAE Ministry of Health.
So they're really stepping up their game.
Africa had about 1% of the global revenue. That's 5.9928 billion US dollars in 2025. And they have a CGR of 37.6%.
Okay, so steady growth.
Yeah, and their growth is mainly driven by, the healthcare sector expanding and more investments in medical technology.
Okay, so they're starting to catch up.
Yeah, now South Africa is the biggest market there. It was 2.10947 billion US dollars with a TLR of 38.5%, and then the rest of Africa combined had a market of 3.40391 billion US dollars with a TGR of 36.8%, and then Nigeria had 0.47942 billion US dollars with a 37.8% CAGR.
Okay, so it sounds like no matter where you look, this outsourcing market is growing.
It really is. It's global.
But the speed and the reasons behind it, they can be different depending on the region.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, the report also digs into, different segments of the market, like the types of devices, the services being offered, the therapeutic areas, and who's actually using these services. What are some of the key takeaways there?
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting because you can see some big trends emerging. So when you look at device types, the biggest segment in 2025 was classified as other device types.
Oh, wow, very descriptive.
I know, right?
Okay.
But basically, it's a big category that includes OEM devices, original equipment manufacturer devices, which are like devices made by one company but sold under another brand.
Yeah, like a store brand, kind of?
Yeah, and it also includes combination products, which are products that combine like drugs and devices, and then advanced therapeutic devices.
So a pretty broad category.
Yeah, it is. But the segment that's growing the fastest is reprocessed devices.
Reprocessed devices.
Yeah, so it's all about sustainability
Yeah.
and, trying to be more cost-effective in healthcare.
Makes sense.
And using more reprocessed devices means there's a bigger need for testing to make sure they're still safe and effective after they've been, clean and reprocessed.
So it creates a whole new area for testing.
Exactly. And it's growing fast.
Okay, so sustainability is having a direct impact on the testing market. What about the specific services that are being outsourced?
All right. So hospitals are the biggest users of these outsourced testing services right now.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But the service that's growing like crazy is something called single nucleotide polymorphism analysis, or SNP analysis.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me.
Okay, so SNP analysis basically looks at these tiny little variations in a person's genetic code.
Okay.
And this is becoming super important for personalized medicine, where treatments are tailored to a person's specific genes.
Right, so everyone gets a treatment that's just for them.
Exactly. And this whole push for personalized medicine is what's driving the growth of those outsourced S&P analysis services.
It's like the future of medicine.
It really is.
Okay, so personalized medicine is definitely changing the game. But how does this trend in testing line up with specific therapeutic areas, like cardiology or oncology?
Okay, so in 2025, the biggest therapeutic area in this whole market was cardiology.
Heart stem.
Yeah, and this is mostly because heart disease is so common worldwide, and there are all these fancy medical devices used to, diagnose and treat heart conditions.
Right, pacemakers, stents, all that.
Exactly. But the area that's growing the fastest is actually general and plastic surgery.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, and this is because more and more people are getting cosmetic procedures and minimally invasive surgeries.
Yeah.
You know?
Like Botox and tummy tucks.
Exactly, and both of those rely on all sorts of specialized medical devices which need to be tested.
Okay. So it's a mix of, serious health concerns and then elective procedures driving the growth in different areas.
Exactly.
Now, who are the main customers for all these outsourcing services? We talked about hospitals, but is it just them?
Hospitals are definitely the biggest single group, but the fastest growing end user category is actually a bit broader. It's called other end uses.
Catchy.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But it includes research institutions.
Right.
Then you've got contract research organizations or CROs, which are basically companies that help out with research for pharmaceutical and medical device companies.
Okay, so like the research assistants.
Yeah, kind of. And then it also includes the medical device manufacturers themselves.
So they outsource their own testing.
Sometimes, yeah, and this is all happening because medical devices are getting so much more complex.
They need that extra help.
Exactly. And they need specialized testing throughout the whole process, from the initial research and development phase all the way to post-market surveillance, even after the device is already out there.
And making sure it still meets the regulations.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not just hospitals anymore. It's a much wider range of folks who need these services. Now, every market has things that help it grow, things that hold it back, and those trends that shape its future. What are the main drivers for this market?
All right, so on the growth side, we're seeing healthcare expanding all over the world.
More people needing more care.
Exactly. And then there's the whole mobile device thing, how medical equipment is getting more connected to mobile devices.
Right, everything's going digital.
Yeah, and that adds a whole new layer of complexity.
Mhm.
Things like data security and making sure all those devices can talk to each other, that all needs to be tested.
It's a whole new set of challenges.
And then, of course, there's the regulations. Those are always getting stricter, especially for medical devices.
So companies need help keeping up.
Exactly. And that's where outsourcing comes in.
Okay, so it's a combination of things driving the market. What about the challenges? What are some of the roadblocks?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is always about quality.
Making sure those devices actually work.
Exactly. And there's always the risk of recalls, if something goes wrong.
And those can be really damaging for a company.
Yeah, so making sure that testing is accurate and reliable is super important in this industry.
Make sense? Any other challenges?
Well, the whole supply chain for medical device testing is pretty complex. It's global.
Parts from all over the world.
Exactly. And that can create some logistical headaches for everyone involved.
Okay, so it's not all smooth sailing.
Definitely not.
Now looking ahead, what are the big trends that are going to shape this market in the future?
Okay, so two things really stand out. First, we're seeing stricter regulations for medical devices pretty much everywhere.
Government's cracking down.
Yeah. And that, of course, means more testing is needed.
Makes sense.
And the second trend is that more and more medical device companies are choosing to outsource their testing.
Which is what this whole market's about.
Exactly. So those two trends are really intertwined.
It's like a feedback loop.
It is.
So regulations are a big deal in this industry now, in this competitive landscape. Who are the big players? The ones who are really leading the way.
So you've got a mix of big global companies and then some smaller regional players.
Okay, like who are we talking about?
Well, the report mentions a few key players like SGS, Société Générale de Surveillance SA. Then there's Toxicon Inc., which is part of Laboratory Corporation of America Holdings. Then Eurofins, Scientific Pace Analytical Services, LLC Intertech Group, FLS, Wuxi Aptech, North American Science Associates, LLC, which is also known as NEMASA, and then Envigo, which is now part of Inative and Charles River Laboratories.
It's a lot of big names.
Yeah, and they compete on a few things, like how many different services they offer, their global reach, and their expertise in specific types of testing or device categories.
So it's all about having the right skills and experience.
Definitely.
Now, the report even gave us a couple of recent examples of what's happening in the market, right? Like specific moves that companies are making.
It did. Yeah, for example, in October 2024, SGS announced that they were expanding their facility in Illinois.
Okay, and why did they do that?
Well, their goal was to boost their biopharmaceutical testing capabilities.
So getting into new areas.
Yeah, it shows that they're really trying to take advantage of the growing demand of that sector, and they want to help their clients deal with all those tricky regulations.
That's smart.
It is. And then in September 2024, Pace Life Sciences went and acquired Catalent's Analytical Services Lab, which was located in Research Triangle Park.
Okay, so another expansion.
Yeah, and this one was specifically to strengthen Pace's expertise in small molecule analysis.
So they're beefing up their skills.
Exactly. And it also expands their network and their capabilities so they can serve more clients, both biopharmaceutical and pharmaceutical clients all across the U.S.
So these are just a couple of examples, but they show that there's a lot of action happening in this market.
There is. Companies are always trying to grow their services and reach new
We're
clients.
trying to stay ahead of the curve.
They have to.
Okay, so to wrap it all up, it sounds like this medical device analytical testing outsourcing market is booming.
It really is. It's experiencing some serious growth worldwide.
And it's all thanks to these stricter regulations, the rapid advancements in medical devices, and the fact that outsourcing these services can save companies a lot of money.
Exactly. Those are the big three drivers.
And those projections are mind-blowing, going from 272.4 billion US dollars in 2025 to 3.42 trillion US dollars by 2033, with a CAGR of 37.20%.
It's huge.
It shows just how much potential there is in this sector.
It really does.
Now, this market's not just about numbers, it's also a reflection of what's happening in healthcare.
Yeah.
There's this huge focus on safety and efficacy, making sure treatments work and that they're safe for patients.
Right. And medical technology is getting so advanced so quickly.
It's mind-blowing.
It is. And then there's this drive for efficiency.
Mhm.
Companies are specializing more and more.
So everyone's finding their niche.
Exactly.
Okay, so here's something to think about. With all this growth and all the ways that healthcare technology is becoming more connected, what new innovations in analytical testing do you think we'll see in the future?
That's a great question.
Things that can keep up with all these demands and also make sure that medical devices are safe and effective for patients all over the world. Think about things like AI, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, and real-time monitoring. How could those things change the way we test medical devices?
It's definitely something to consider because this field is changing so fast.
It's not going to slow down anytime soon.
Definitely not. The innovations in medical devices and the regulations, they're always evolving. So analytical testing is going to be a crucial part of healthcare for a long time.
It's exciting to see what the future holds.
It is.
What new technologies will emerge and how they'll shape the way we deliver healthcare.
It's a really dynamic field, and it's only going to get more interesting.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.
And thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.